Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Now, looking at the title of this video, you might think to yourself something like Space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, etc., etc. So you might think I'm going to be talking about space, etc., but this is actually very far from truth. Not talking about what the truth are, etc. You see, the digressions are already starting, but yeah. Hopefully I would satisfy with the bare minimum of those. But anyway, so I'm going to be talking about something very down to earth, rather. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about some of the troubling developments that we have currently in society, economics, and politics. All of those pretty much mashed up together. So, and there are, I would say, two aspects to about what I'm gonna tell you, hopefully, today. Like, one aspect is purely theoretical, almost philosophical, you might say, or philosophical. And the second aspect is practical, like what is really happening today, what can be observed. And then I'll try to sort of meddle them together or synthesize something from those two and come to certain conclusions which would be pretty grim, to be honest. So if you're not into grim stuff, you might close this tab. Whatever. So let's start from the theoretical branch of this issue. So one of the main principles in, let's say, libertarianism or classical liberalism or anarcho-capitalism, which is arguably just a branch of libertarianism, which I adhere to, by the way, is the principle of so-called self-ownership. And what does that mean? Or otherwise called like sovereignty of the individual sovereignty, etc. So I would claim that it's actually a key principle of any libertarian / classical liberal thought. I mean, in America, obviously, the term liberals almost means socialists because of your McCarthyism, etc. But liberalism in a classical sense of the word. So maybe libertarianism would be better in this regard. So it's a key principle, this self-ownership principle, I believe. So what it states is basically you have the sovereignty over your own body. So you are the only person who can affect your body, period, basically. So yeah, your body is your property and no one else's, right? Except some exceptions, like there's also a principle of non-aggression principle, NAP, in libertarianism, which claims that if you commit aggression, like violence towards someone, they can retaliate, basically, or something to that effect. So in those cases, if you are the aggressor, you can lose your sovereignty over your body, or at least over your property, or etc. But that's not the point here. The point is that this self-ownership is really the key principle of libertarianism. And for example, if you read Ludwig von Mises, one of the, I would claim actually that he was the main ideologist, not putting anything bad into this word, of libertarianism in the 20th century. So in his book, Human Action, it's a really long book, but it's a very consistent and it's very sort of theoretical, and it's very thorough, I would say. So in this book, he says that for the free market to exist, basically you need the sovereignty of the individual, this self-ownership, because you can't really own anything, if you think about it, like any item, any goods or whatever, if you don't even own your body. Like basically you exist in this world through your body. Of course, we're not talking about some fundamental ontology philosophy like what you are, but the manifestation of you in the world is your body. So if you don't even own your body, how can you own anything else that you can, let's say, interact with your body, right? So it's a pretty simple statement and pretty understandable one, I think. So this is exactly what I would call And obviously, free market is impossible without property. So if property is impossible without your self-ownership, then, and free market is impossible without property, obviously free market is impossible without self-ownership. That's a very simple syllogism, if you like. So this is what I would call the final frontier, the self-ownership principle. Basically, if you owning your own body, you being the sole governor of your body, is the necessary condition of the free market and liberty and all those beautiful things, and without sarcasm, like literally beautiful things. So yeah, so self-ownership is the final frontier. It is the necessary condition. Like it's something without which you cannot have liberty, free market, all those things, right? But I'll expand a little bit later on that. So in the recent century plus, let's say 150 years or 170 or about so, I would say we've seen, or we witnessed through like history books or our own lives, certain. And that's already a second branch. So I've already finished with the first branch, the theoretical one. So the second branch is like more practical, like what we actually observe. So in the recent like 150 years maybe, or 70 years, we've witnessed the rise of socialism and the increase in, let's say, government control over things. Especially, I mean, if you take the US as an example, it's very clear, like this era of progressivists, which started roughly at the year 1900. It's a really clear division when this so-called Gilded Age ended, which was characteristic of the fastest economic growth, like the freest market possible, right? Roughly after the Civil War and before the start of the 20th century, it was like the best time for America in terms of freedom, at least, right? And thus fastest economic growth. So, so we've witnessed this rise of socialism, at least in the 20th century, pretty much everywhere. And so what socialism does, it removes your property, right? It kind of expropriates, or whatever the word they use. So it's the removal of property rights, essentially. But these were mostly external property rights. Like, you lose your stuff, roughly speaking, right? They introduce the central bank, therefore you lose your money. They introduce taxation, therefore you lose the money in your pocket, not in the bank. Then they introduce, I don't know, whatever regulations. You have to share something, you have to lose something, etc., etc. So, but those are all external things, right? It's stuff you own, but it's not concerning your body. But recent advances, I would say, in this increasing socialism that we still observe all over the world, lead to us understanding that it actually moves closer and closer to our bodies. So we start to lose control, to lose our sovereignty over our bodies. And well, if you just extrapolate this to the end, so to speak, you would lose control over your body, absolutely. And let me clarify this a little bit. So I'll give you 3 examples of recent serious concerns of modern society, let's say. And well, of course, when I would say them, tell them to you, you would say, well, that may be some crackpot ideas or conspiracy theories, but I'm not really interested in ideas themselves. I'm not advocating for any of those. I'm just, let's say, pointing to them as serious concerns that many people have, and justifiably so, I would say. But I'm not going to discuss the particularities. I'm not going to be talking about these problems. I'm just gonna try to kind of unify them to the single root. All right. So these 3 concerns let's order them by increasing in severity. So one concern is about the food. So you might say, well, what are they putting in my food? This, proverbial they. What am I buying actually? Like who controls this? Like what are they putting in it? And here we can talk about, GMOs, various chemicals added to your food, various whatever, because it alters your body, right? But here it's not very severe in terms that you have choice. At least you can not buy this food, you can buy some other food, etc. You can produce food on your own, although it's really ineffective, but anyway, you have some choice, right? So this is first point, food. And there has been many concerns, and again, justifiable concerns in the recent, let's say, 70 years about diet, about what you should eat, what you shouldn't, like about the corruption in the food industry, etc., and etc., etc. Again, I'm not discussing this. I'm just trying to build a meta-narrative around this. All right. So the food, first point. The second concern was about these cell phone networks, right? And plus here I would say Wi-Fi networks. And plus here I would say the modern concern with 5G and those kinds of stuff. So here the problem is more severe because you have much less choice. Like you are exposed to it whatever you do. Like if you don't use Wi-Fi, 5G and cell phone, your neighbor uses it. So therefore you're still exposed to this radiation whether you like it or not. Except if you, I don't know, build a Faraday cage around your whole apartment, etc. But then again, if you walk outside, there's a whole bunch of Wi-Fi, 5G, cell phone networks there. So you have much less choice here with regards to the food. So it's more severe. Your body is subject to this external influence that you cannot control. So it's some external agency altering your body. Of course, people say it's not really altering you that much, but again, I'm not concerned with the degree of alteration. And well, let's say I'm just skipping this stage because it's not really researched that well. So we cannot really say how much it alters us, right? And again, even microwave ovens is another example, but hopefully you get the idea. So it's another concern of modern society and a justifiable one, I would say. Right? So food, let's say wireless communication. Then the third concern, which is the most severe, is the vaccines, obviously. And, well, you probably heard about anti-vaccination movement and et cetera, et cetera. But a vaccine is something that, like, is literally introduced into your body. So you kind of inevitably would suffer from it. I mean, suffer in a very abstract sense. So it would change you in some way, right? In this sense. So, well, okay, I wouldn't stop here discussing again the whole problematic of vaccination and potential harmful effects and like the doubtfulness of positive effects of it, but again, so let's just skip this discussion. Let's just return to the main issue I'm discussing in this video. So these three things, hopefully, you can see how basically all three impact our body, right? So it's an invasion into our body, either through food, wireless communication, or vaccination, which is kind of direct interaction with your body. So, well, of course, the food is also, but with food, you have much more choice than with vaccines. So, so the principal problem behind all of them is that, again, returning to this theoretical branch and kind of trying to unite those two together, is that can I be the owner of my body today, like in this day and age, so to speak? And of course, again, speaking about vaccination, this the strongest case, for example, okay, One thing I forgot to mention with regards to food, sorry, rewinding a little bit back, like, so when I talked about the food, I should have said that, a lot of actually monopolies appear on the food market, agriculture market, like Monsanto, proverbial, etc. So I should have mentioned that, I just forgot. So who knows what Monsanto does to our food, right? Etc. So let's rewind forward. So, can I be the owner of my body today? This is the problem. This is the question that those two branches unite together in. And obviously, it is reinforced by our current situation with the corona, because it's not very hard to see that the mandatory vaccine against the corona is right about the corner. Around the corner, right? And here I should make a very short intermission. I should mention that Russian politologist Ekaterina Schulmann, she says, and I really like this idea, that crises, and today we're clearly in a crisis, this pandemic, she says that crises do not introduce anything new into the political system. Well, in this case, it also concerns economic and society in general systems. So she says that the crises do not introduce anything new into these systems. They just accelerate whatever is already present in these systems. So whatever contradictions and struggle for power, this is my own interpretation already, exists in those systems, any crisis, it just makes these confrontations, these contradictions worse. So it accelerates the confrontation. It becomes more violent, and it quickly kind of moves to resolution of some sort. And you can think about wars, for example. Like any war is really this amplified, accelerated stage of a political conflict, basically, or economic conflict, where economy drives politics, etc. Hopefully you get the idea. And by the way, I would recommend you to listen to Ekaterina Schulmann. I'll write down her name in English in the description of the video, because she has I think 5 or 7 videos in English, quite a lengthy one. So she is one of the best political experts in the world, and I would claim the best political expert in Russia. So if you'd like to kind of familiarize yourself with the political situation in Russia and political theory, modern political theory in general, I would recommend you to listen to her. She's really brilliant, like seriously. She's one of the brightest minds today, I would claim. All right. So you can look her up on YouTube again. I'll put her name in the description in Latin characters. All right. So, this mandatory vaccination against the corona is around the corner, I would say. And again, in Russia, for example, they're already preparing a legislation for mandatory vaccination against anything. So you would be forced to take the vaccine that the government tells you to take. Basically, this is the bottom line. It's not yet approved, but there's no doubt it would be approved. So very shortly, like maybe in a couple of months or in half a year or something like that. So, and it looks like in the very near future, we would encounter a situation where this external agency, whether it's a government or whatever, at least sanctioned by the government, right? This external agency, whatever it is, would be able to alter our bodies even without our consent, on a regular basis even. So, what it means is that, you might say, again, it's just a crisis situation. This mandatory vaccine against the corona, it's just a 1 in like a billion type of case. But I would claim otherwise, like the increase in number of those precedents, again, regulations about food, regulations about this radiation, whatever we're receiving, regulations about vaccines, etc. it's clearly increasing, like it's moving somewhere. So this increase in number of those precedents brings us, I would say, closer to slavery, because again, like if some other people can alter our bodies, abstractly speaking, in those three ways and in many others, without our consent, what does that mean? That we lose our right for self-ownership. We lose our ability to control ourselves. It's somebody else who is now in our body, literally. I mean, there's also this more of a suspicious discussion about chips, computer chips, and like implanted in your body, etc. I'm not really into this, but this is clearly the same type of reasoning, and in this regard, it is correct. Like, no, you probably shouldn't allow anyone else invade your body. I mean, this is my point of view. This would be a really bad idea. In the long run, at least, right? It might give you benefits, so, but it's, this, how do you call it in English? Damn, carrot and a stick method, like, or something like that. But it's someone who gives you both carrot and a stick, hits you with a stick. So it's someone else who controls you anyway. So you lose sovereignty that way or another. Actually, both things make you lose your sovereignty. So it's twice as bad, carrot and a stick, than just a stick or just a carrot, let's say. Right? Actually, carrot is not as bad if you exchange it to something, free market kind of situation. But anyway, so sorry, another digression. So, and there's no doubt that the amount of these precedents would increase, and I would claim that it would spiral down very quickly if you let it loose, so to speak. So, firstly, it was food, then was radiation, then there was vaccines, then there would be chips, then there would be who knows what, like direct brain to computer interface that would kind of make you, kind of bring you pain if you do something not correct or something. I mean, you see where this is going. I mean, I don't want to sound like conspiratorial. I'm not actually talking about this like any practical issues. I'm talking about principle issues. Like, we're really losing control over our bodies. That's what I'm talking about. And yeah, so, and it leads to slavery, essentially, because slaves don't have property, just as I've said at the very beginning, because their bodies are under someone else's control. So, a slave's body is actually someone else's property. So, how can a slave have any other property if any property is acquired through body, again, as I've claimed at the beginning, because, well, how you interact with the world through your body. So if your body belongs to someone else, then everything else that you own also belongs to this other person anyway, right? So this is the problem. And yeah. So slaves cannot have any property because they are not even their own property in the first place. Yeah, so this is basically the main idea of this video, is that self-ownership basically is the last citadel, I would say, of freedom. It's kind of, I'm bringing up the same analogy I've talked about in my video, the Great Wall and the abduction of Europa. And like this last citadel of freedom is already besieged by socialistic / totalitarian orcs, so to speak. And it's really clear now that like we're moving closer and closer to the situation where your body would be no longer yours, like somebody else would control it. And again, I want to distance myself from these conspiracy theories like, oh, 5G towers bring mind control into place. No, I'm more of a, let's say, skeptical about that, but you can't deny that 5G towers affect your body, right? They alter it in some way. Which way, we don't really know, because again, independent research is suppressed. Mainstream research says there's nothing wrong, and there's a lot of doubts, but these doubts are suppressed again. So how would we know? Like, yeah, it's a really crappy situation. So a genuine debate, a genuine dialogue is not possible today because, well, people who are in power don't care really, right? But some people say that people who are in power actually are malicious, and those are conspiracy theories. But I wouldn't claim that. I'm just simply stating that we are not in control right now in those many respects that I've listed of what happens to our bodies, and this is a bad situation because we lose control over our bodies and we turn into slaves. Well, hopefully it was more or less understandable what I've said. All right, so by the way, like literally in 9 minutes from now here in Minsk, where I am, there would be a maximum of lunar eclipse of June 5th. So it's kind of appropriate to talk about this stuff right now. It's sort of a grim, dark perspective, etc., etc. All right, so the conclusion I would make from all of that is that really this self-ownership is the last citadel of freedom, or again, this great wall, or maybe a last line of defense, the final frontier, again, as the title says, on the brink of slavery, and it's currently under serious threat. Hopefully I was able to show this to you. Okay, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.